Imagine being Prime Minister and having the General Secretary of Labour's biggest trade union donor publicly declare that your replacement is inevitable, describing your government as rudderless and austerity lite, warning that you are sowing the seeds of your own destruction, and basically saying that even if Labour replaces you with Angela Rayner, Andy Burnham, Wes Streeting, or Ed Miliband, it will not matter because they are all offering more of the same in a different voice. That is the absolutely brutal assessment Sharon Graham, the boss of Unite, has just delivered to Keir Starmer in the Times. Unite is Britain's second-largest trade union by membership and was Labour's biggest donor this year, which makes Graham's intervention genuinely significant rather than just another critic throwing stones. She has described Labour's agenda as failing leadership, accused Ed Miliband's net zero policies of being economic self-harm, and criticised Rachel Reeves for opting for stealth taxes on workers instead of a wealth tax on the mega-rich. This is not just bad news for Starmer. This is an existential crisis where one of Labour's most important institutional supporters is publicly discussing not just whether the Prime Minister should be replaced, but warning that replacing him without fundamentally changing policies is pointless. When your biggest donors are writing your political obituary in national newspapers, you know you are in serious trouble. Quick favor. If you are absolutely fascinated by the spectacular falling out between Labour and its trade union backers who are basically saying Starmer is finished and even his potential replacements are not good enough, hit that subscribe button right now. Over 94% of you watching have not subscribed yet. It is completely free, takes literally 2 seconds, and helps us keep bringing you these moments where political careers implode and institutional support collapses in real time. Cheers if you did. Now back to this devastating union rebellion. Let us start with who Sharon Graham is and why her intervention matters so much. Because this is not just any critic or political commentator, but someone with genuine power and influence over Labour's future. Graham is the General Secretary of Unite, which is Britain's second-largest trade union, with well over 1 million members across multiple industries. More importantly for Labour's immediate concerns, Unite was the party's biggest donor in 2025, pumping millions of pounds into Labour coffers to fund campaigns, operations, and election efforts. When the person writing your biggest checks publicly declares that your replacement as Prime Minister is inevitable, you need to pay attention because they have a financial leverage to make your political life extremely difficult. Graham's description of Labour's agenda as rudderless is particularly cutting because it suggests a government without clear direction or purpose, drifting from crisis to crisis without any coherent vision of what it is trying to achieve. The phrase austerity lite is even more damaging because it associates Labour with the conservative austerity policies that devastated public services and communities over the past decade. Labour was supposed to be the alternative to austerity, the party that would invest in public services and support working people. If your own trade union backers are accusing you of implementing austerity lite, you have fundamentally failed to deliver on the core promise of your political project. The warning that the government risks sowing the seeds of its own destruction if Starmer's successor does not depart from the current path is genuinely ominous language. Graham is not just criticizing the current leadership. She is warning that unless there is fundamental change in both personnel and policy, Labour is heading for electoral catastrophe and potentially long-term decline. The seeds of your own destruction is biblical language that suggests inevitable collapse unless dramatic action is taken. This is not a temporary dip in the polls or a rough patch that can be weathered. This is an existential threat to Labour's future as a governing party. But Graham's piece was absolutely clear on one crucial point. If a change at the top is made, the narrative must be different. Otherwise, it is simply pointless. It cannot just be a question of changing the leader or improving the sales pitch. This is where Graham's intervention becomes genuinely interesting and goes beyond typical leadership criticism. She is not saying Starmer needs to go and everything will be fine with someone else in charge. She is saying that replacing Starmer without changing fundamental policies is meaningless. The problem is not just a messenger, it is the message itself. Graham spelled this out explicitly. There is much agonizing right now about whether, when, and who should replace the Prime Minister. That is inevitable. But a new Labour leader with the same policies will not cut it. Replacing Keir with Angela Rayner, Andy Burnham, Wes Streeting, or Ed Miliband will not persuade workers to return to the fold if they are just offering more of the same in a different voice. This is absolutely devastating for the potential leadership candidates who might be positioning themselves to take over from Starmer. Graham is preemptively saying that none of them will solve Labour's problems unless they fundamentally change direction on policy. It is like telling someone their entire approach to a problem is wrong before they have even tried to fix it. The fact that Unite is Britain's second largest trade union by membership and was Labour's biggest donor this year makes this intervention impossible for Labour to ignore. You can dismiss criticism from political opponents or media commentators, but when your largest financial backer is publicly criticizing your policies and leadership, you have a genuine crisis. Money is the lifeblood of political parties, funding everything from campaign materials to staff salaries to election advertising. If Unite decides to withdraw or significantly reduce its financial support because it is disillusioned with Labour's direction, the party will face immediate practical difficulties funding its operations. The detail that Unite became the only affiliated union not to endorse Labour's manifesto is genuinely shocking and tells you how deep the division runs. Every other major union backed Labour's manifesto, but Unite refused, which is an extraordinary rebuke to the party leadership. Refusing to endorse the manifesto of the party you are affiliated with and financially support is basically saying we fundamentally disagree with your program and cannot in good conscience support it. That Graham is now describing Starmer's leadership as failing and expressing lack of belief in any other potential leader only compounds this institutional rejection. Unite's priorities were made absolutely clear in Graham's statement. Trade unions are there to fight for workers, not to side with politicians. This is a declaration of independence from Labour that signals Unite sees its primary loyalty as being to its members rather than to the Labour Party. For decades, trade unions and Labour were essentially two sides of the same movement, with unions providing funding and campaigning support while Labour provided political representation for working people. Graham is suggesting that relationship has broken down because Labour is no longer adequately representing workers' interests, which means Unite needs to prioritize its members over party loyalty. Graham's description of Ed Miliband's net zero policies as economic self-harm is particularly pointed because it goes after one of Labour's flagship policy areas. The transition to net zero emissions is central to Labour's climate agenda and is supposed to be creating green jobs and building a sustainable economy. For the General Secretary of a major union to call these policies self-harm and accuse Miliband of running a jobless transition away from fossil fuels suggests that workers in affected industries feel abandoned by Labour's approach. They see the push to eliminate fossil fuel jobs without adequate plans for replacing them with equivalent green jobs in the same communities, which creates economic devastation and political resentment. Discussing last month's budget delivered by Rachel Reeves, Graham delivered another devastating critique. Opting for stealth taxes on workers instead of a wealth tax on the mega-rich was the wrong choice. Labour must stop being embarrassed to be the voice of workers. This goes to the heart of what many on the left see as Labour's fundamental betrayal. The party was supposed to make wealthy people pay more to fund public services and support working families. Instead, according to Graham, Reeves chose stealth taxes that hit workers while protecting the mega-rich from having to contribute fairly. The accusation that Labour must stop being embarrassed to be the voice of workers is particularly cutting because it suggests the party has abandoned its core identity and values out of some misguided desire to appear moderate or appealing to wealthy voters. Graham has refused to rule out the possibility of Unite voting to end its affiliation to Labour next year, which would be an absolute earthquake in British politics. If Unite disaffiliates from Labour, it would not just be a financial blow through loss to nations, it would be a symbolic rejection of the Labour Party by one of the founding pillars of the Labour movement. The trade union declined to exercise its right to nominate either candidate in this year's Deputy Labour leadership election, which is another sign of their disengagement from internal Labour politics. They are essentially saying we do not trust any of your candidates and we are not participating in your internal processes. But the problems for Starmer do not stop with Unite. Andrea Egan, described as a stark critic of the Prime Minister, was recently appointed Chief of Unison, Britain's largest union. If both Unite and Unison, the two biggest unions in Britain, are led by people openly critical of Starmer and his government, Labour faces an institutional revolt from the union movement that could cripple the party financially and politically. Unions provide not just money but also campaigning volunteers, grassroots organization, and political legitimacy. Graham's conclusion was bleak and uncompromising. For too long it has been everyday people, workers, and communities who have paid the price for crisis after crisis not of their making. In 2026 this must stop. The government needs to decide what it stands for and who it stands for. If we have to ask, it is not working. That line, if we have to ask, it is not working, perfectly captures the problem. A Labour government should not need to convince trade unions that it stands for workers. That should be obvious from its actions and policies. The fact that Graham feels a need to demand clarity on these fundamental questions tells you that Labour has lost its way so completely that even its own institutional supporters do not know what the party is trying to achieve. The party faithful can agonize about its failing leadership in A Night of the Long Knives. Graham wrote, referencing the famous historical phrase about political purges and leadership coups. But a new Labour leadership with the same policies simply will not cut it. The doom loop cannot be broken with more austerity light, no matter who is in Downing Street. That phrase, doom loop, describes a self-reinforcing cycle where bad policies lead to bad results, which lead to unpopularity, which leads to more desperate attempts to please voters through bad policies, creating a downward spiral that becomes impossible to escape.